I always dreamed of becoming a soldier. The idea of defending my country, the sense of brotherhood, and the adventures attracted me. I was drafted into the U.S. Army and sent to Fort Riley, Kansas. It was a huge complex, spanning thousands of acres, with tanks, helicopters, and numerous buildings. I quickly realized that military life was not just about adventures, but also hard work and constant stress. One day, our company was sent on a training mission to a forest near the base. The place was known as Dark Forest. According to legends, this forest was cursed. Once, an entire company of soldiers disappeared here, and their bodies were never found. But we didn't believe in these tales. We were soldiers, not children afraid of the dark. Our commander, Captain Johnson, conducted a briefing and handed out maps with the route. We had to go through the forest, set up observation points, and return to the base. Everything went according to plan until it started getting dark. The forest became more sinister, and we felt like someone was watching us. The first strange incident happened when we stopped for the night. A soldier named Mike heard a strange noise and went to check it out. He didn't return. We searched the entire area, but he was nowhere to be found. It was strange because Mike was an experienced soldier and couldn't just disappear. The next day, we continued our way, but the sense of unease only grew. Each of us felt like someone was following us. Soon, we lost another soldier, and then another. Captain Johnson decided to return to the base and report the situation, but the forest seemed alive and didn't want to let us go. In the darkness, we saw strange shadows moving between the trees. They weren't animals or people. They were something else. When we tried to establish contact with the base, the radio didn't work. We were cut off from the outside world. One evening, when we had almost lost hope of rescue, Captain Johnson gathered us together and said, "We need to find them and destroy them. It's our only chance." We took our weapons and started moving in the direction where we thought the strange sounds were coming from. We found an old bunker hidden in the forest. The entrance was sealed, but we broke the door and went inside. There we found Mike and the other missing soldiers. They were alive, but very scared. They told us that strange creatures with glowing eyes who could move through walls had captured them. We realized we were dealing with something supernatural. Captain Johnson decided to blow up the bunker to destroy these creatures. We set the explosives and began to retreat. When we exited the bunker, we saw dark shadows appearing from different sides. They tried to surround us. Captain Johnson activated the explosives, and the bunker collapsed. We heard the creatures' screams, and the forest suddenly became silent. We returned to the base, where we were greeted as heroes. But I will always remember those glowing eyes and the feeling of being watched even now. We destroyed the bunker and the creatures. But what if it was just the beginning? What if the dark forest holds more secrets and dangers that we don't even suspect? I was in the middle of my military service in the small town of Fort Bragg, North Carolina. My name is Mark Davis, and I served in the local Special Operations Unit. Our mission this time was particularly unusual. We had to investigate a series of strange disappearances happening in the nearby forest. The last group of missing soldiers consisted of 3 who went on a night patrol and never returned. Our unit consisted of 5 people: me, Sergeant Thompson, Corporal Jenkins, Private Martinez, and Private Smith. We set out into the forest late in the evening when the fog began to thicken and visibility became very poor. Everything around looked ghostly and unreal. The silence was broken only by the sounds of our steps and breaths. "I don't like this," whispered Jenkins as we walked along a narrow path. "Something is definitely wrong here." "Keep it together, Corporal," replied Sergeant Thompson. "We have to find our comrades." Suddenly, we heard a strange noise. It sounded like crying or moaning coming from somewhere ahead. We stopped and listened carefully. The sounds grew louder. What could it be? asked Martinez, his voice trembling. I don't know, but we have to find out, Thompson answered. Everyone, follow me. We moved forward and the noise became louder. Suddenly, we saw something on the ground. It was the remains of a military uniform and blood. Martinez bent down to take a closer look. These are our guys, he said with concern. But where are they? We continued to move forward and came across an old, abandoned building. It looked like an old school or hospital, and the crying was coming from inside. My heart beat faster, but we knew we had to enter. Inside, it was dark and cold. We moved through the corridors, searching every room. The crying grew louder and more sinister. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the darkness. It was one of the missing soldiers, but his eyes were empty, and his face was distorted with horror. Help! Us! He barely whispered before collapsing on the floor. We rushed to him, but it was too late. His body was cold, and no help could save him. Smith stepped back a few paces, and suddenly we heard a new sound, a raspy breathing approaching from the darkness. Out of the darkness came something horrifying. It looked like a person, but with a scarred face and glowing eyes. We opened fire, but the bullets didn't harm it. It kept coming closer, and we felt terror gripping our hearts. Retreat! Shouted Thompson. We began to run through the corridors, trying to find a way out. But the fog inside the building became thicker, and we lost each other. I found myself alone in one of the corridors. My flashlight flickered, and I heard someone or something approaching me. I found a door and rushed inside, hoping for salvation. But inside was just another room filled with old furniture and dust. I held my breath and listened. Silence. But it was just an illusion. Suddenly, something grabbed my leg, and I fell to the floor. I struggled, trying to break free, but the force was too strong. I saw the face of my pursuer and realized it wasn't just a person. It was something ancient and sinister that fed on fear. I closed my eyes, preparing for the worst, but suddenly everything stopped. Silence reigned around me, and I opened my eyes. My comrade stood before me, all alive and well. It was just a dream, said Thompson, helping me up. We found you unconscious in the forest. I couldn't believe my ears, but when we returned to the base, I realized something had changed. My name is Jason Murphy. I'm a sergeant in the U.S. Army, originally from Texas. I've served in many places, but what happened in the small town of Bloomsville, Virginia, changed my life forever. It was an ordinary day. Our unit received a mission to check an abandoned military base near the town. Locals complained about strange noises coming from there and mysterious disappearances of people. We arrived at the base late in the evening. It was clear that no one had been there for a long time. Broken windows, overgrown buildings, it all looked eerie. We split into groups to inspect every corner. My comrade, Corporal Michael Roberts, and I went to the central command post. The heavy door creaked open, and we entered. There were old documents, papers, and empty weapon boxes everywhere. But the most frightening was the sound coming from the underground bunker. Did you hear that? Michael asked, his voice trembling slightly. Yes, it seems to be coming from below. Let's check it out. We descended the stairs to the underground level. The flashlights barely illuminated the path. With each step, the sound grew louder. It was a child's cry. We quickly moved towards the source and suddenly saw a room with heavy metal doors. Here, I shouted and, straining, opened the door. What we saw was indescribable. In the room stood a large water tank, and next to it lay the body of a child, covered with a thin cloth. The cry was coming from another child, sitting in the corner, scared and exhausted. "Oh my God, what happened here?" Michael whispered. We approached, but suddenly the door slammed shut behind us with a loud bang. We were trapped. At that moment, a man in a military uniform emerged from the darkness. His eyes glowed with a mad light. "You shouldn't have come here," he said calmly, but his voice sent a chill down my spine. "Who are you?" I asked, my hand on my gun. "I am Captain James Norton. I was the commander of this base until I realized we were experimenting on our own children. His words were absurd, but his gaze told the truth. He slowly approached the tank where strange substances floated. This place has become hell for everyone who was here. They wanted to create perfect soldiers, but everything went wrong. Now I guard these souls. Michael stepped forward, trying to understand what was happening. Suddenly, Norton lunged at us. A fight broke out. I fired several shots, but the bullets passed through him as if he were a ghost. We managed to break down the door and escape. We ran through the dark corridor until we got outside. At that moment, the building began to collapse. We barely made it to a safe distance when everything crumbled. Reinforcements arrived at the base, but found nothing but ruins. No traces of children, no evidence of what we saw. Just charred metal and ashes. Returning home, Michael and I were silent about what happened. But I know one thing, those souls are still there, in hell, waiting for release. And maybe someday we can return and finish what we started. This story has become part of me. I see those faces every night, and every day I live with the burden of truth that no one wants to hear. But I will keep fighting, hoping to free them from this horror one day.